Oh, hello. Today we are wrapping up my reading for the month of May 2021, and it was a very mixed bag, shall we say. I have been fighting a slump. I was looking at my stats. I actually went an entire week without reading anything, gasp horror, which is very unusual for me. And I have been doing a lot of kind of palate cleansing reads. So I do feel like I'm slowly emerging from my slump, but I wouldn't say I'm all the way there. I actually, looking at all of my stats and stuff, very happy with how much progress I did make this month, just in terms of some of the, things I wanted to get done, I did do. And ironically, a book I really did not enjoy, I think ended up helping me start to turn the tide. So we will get into my hits, my surprises, and my disappointments here in a minute, but as always, we will start with my stats. So for the month of May, I actually read 21 books. Now granted, a lot of those were very short sci-fi romance kind of things that were like 150 pages and pretty easy to get through, but still, 21 books, it's a lot, especially considering how I took a week off, etc. So that surprised me, which actually, now that I'm looking at some of my length stats, this makes a little bit more sense. So I did read a total of 4,327 pages for an average book length of 202 pages. So that makes a little bit more sense in terms of volume-wise, not that unusual for me, but length-wise, much fewer pages read, shorter books on average. The average age of book I read was 11 years old, and the average amount of time it had been on my TBR was about 6 months, so pretty good on both of those scores. Of the books I read, I paid for 19% of them, and the average cost of book that I paid for was $2.34. In terms of where I got books this month, it was highly skewed over towards Kindle Unlimited because that was where a lot of the sci-fi romances I was reading came from, but I also read a few from publishers, a couple from Amazon. Genre-wise, highly skewed towards sci-fi romance, speculative romance, and then I think my second most read genre was mystery, which makes sense because I was watching a lot of mysteries on TV, and then I was also reading some mysteries. So some of that, I read a couple of sci-fi, a little bit of nonfiction. I think that this actually feels a little off to me just because I was doing that big reread of Jane Eyre, so in my mind that took up more of my reading time, but I don't count that in my stats, as well as like rereading some nonfiction related to Jane Eyre. So anyway, this feels a little off to me, but in terms of new reads, this makes sense. And then in terms of rating, so I actually was liking things I was reading pretty well overall. As you can see, I did have one big miss that we will definitely talk about, but overall my average rating was I think 3.42 stars, so not bad at all. Then in terms of challenges I addressed, I actually did really much better than I thought I might have. So I read 3 arcs, 2 of which I'm going to talk about later. That's Anne of Manhattan, Dead Girls, and then the one that I'm not going to talk about later was The Runaway Heiress by Meg Tilly. So Meg Tilly is a romantic suspense author who I really enjoy. She has a very interesting fusion of tones. So she writes romantic suspenses that have a very sort of like lighthearted tone to them that's unusual for that subgenre. And this one I would say is probably the one that has worked the least for me of all of the ones that I have read so far from her. That's only because I felt like the setting for this one wasn't as successful for her tone. So till now, all of hers have been romantic suspenses set in a small town. And I think that idea of sort of a small town romance with a romantic suspense has worked well for her. This one had a really unpleasant hero, and it was set in Hollywood, so it was sort of it didn't have that kind of cozier vibe to it. So I just think taste-wise, this wasn't my favorite for the kind of book she writes. But that being said, I still think that it was like a very fun book. So, I still had a fun enough time in it. It just wasn't like my favorite from her. And then I did read these 2 books for book club, but I'm going to talk about both of them more later. So we will come back to these. And then I did actually read 2 Lord Peter Wimsey's short story collections. So both of those were on my 21 books I want to read in 2021. This experience has confirmed to me that I am not going to read any more of the full novels from Dorothy L. Sayers. I feel like this whole Lord Peter reading thing has been kind of a bust, and I apologize for those of you who are really excited about it. It just turned, I mean, the heart wants what it wants, you like what you like, and I just don't think what she does in novel form works as well for 2021 Mara as it did for, 2008 Mara, for whatever reason. So I do like the short stories. I actually gave both of these collections 3 stars. I just don't think, like, they're perfectly pleasant. They're fine. They were what I was in the mood for, like something short and really whodunit-y. But they just weren't that memorable. They weren't that great. So they were fine. They met my expectations, but I'm not enticed to read more of the novels. But I do have 2 more short story collections from her in the Lord Peter series, so I will read both of those happily, because they, when I'm in the right mood for whodunit, they definitely hit the spot. But yeah, I'm sorry. I feel like this whole project has been a little bit of a bust this year, but I guess that's just, when you take a risk, sometimes it doesn't pay off. So there's that. And then I also did a reread of Hostage to Pleasure from Nalini Singh for my podcast. So that, I think, were all the challenges that I needed to address. So now we can move into my disappointments, my surprises, and my hits. So we'll start with the one disappointment I had, and this, oh boy, was it a disappointment. So this was a 1.5 star read. I would have 1000% DNF this had it not been something we were reading for the Blades and Bodice Rippers book club, so I had to keep going. I did not like this. I will say, ironically, because of how much I did not enjoy reading this, I think it helped to de-slump me, because the thing I picked up after it, I enjoyed so much more. So I'm wondering if it sort of just like kickstarted, like I was just so relieved to not be reading Shadow and Claw anymore that I was just very excited for the next book I picked up. This book is kind of a landmark genre classic within the Dying Earth realm of sci-fi fantasy. This is, I think, called a science fantasy book, which makes sense because basically it is in the future, it's sci-fi, but it reads almost like fantasy because basically those humans who are still on Earth have devolved in what they have available to them technologically to the point where it reads like a fantasy. However, there are tons of remnants of advanced technology all over the place. It's just not always usable, or it's not always understood by the characters. The idea of this, like that whole I like a Dying Earth trope. Like I've really enjoyed like Book of the Ancestors from Mark Lawrence. There's definitely things within that, subgenre that intrigue me, that I enjoy. This just was agony for me to read. And what I've realized is that it has to do with the writing. So the writing is just paced so oddly for my tastes. I just find that both nothing is happening and far too much is happening somehow at the same time. So like on a sentence to sentence level, it's okay, but like if I reflect at all on what's been going on and like how I'm feeling about what's been going on, I just am like, this is nonsense. I don't like this. I just don't like it. And then on top of that, it is incredibly misogynistic. Now, it is in the point of view of the character. I'm not trying to ascribe that to the author per se, because I think that it's intentional to some degree. Like, I think it's meant to make our main character, Severin, unlikable. But I also don't think that his misogyny is problematized on the page to the extent it would need to be for me to like really get on board with that. So, and I think if it were written today, it would be written in a way that that did happen. So this is a great example of what I was talking about in my video essay about Jane Eyre, like when I was doing my whole like theory of death of the author, like getting into that whole section, where there are certain of its time elements in books that just hit different readers in a different way. And because I was already not liking this book, that hit me in a very negative way and just basically pushed the book past redemption for me. So, but if I had been into this book a little bit more, maybe I would have just been like, oh, I don't like that, but whatever. But because I was not enjoying it, it made me not enjoy it even further. All that to say, I think that if I had DNF'd this, I would not have such lingeringly negative feelings for it, this was a good reminder to me of why I DNF things, because I don't want to be reading something I'm not enjoying. Life is too short. My reading time is too short and valuable, but I did have to push through. I did not enjoy this, and I'm very glad to unhaul it. But, you know, I'm not mad about reading it in the sense of deeper appreciation for the genre. It got a reaction out of me, even if it wasn't the one I was hoping for. So that was definitely the big disappointment of the month. Then 3 surprises I wanted to hit. First, Dead Dead Girls by Nekesa Afia. I really enjoyed this book. I gave it 4 stars. The reason I wanted to call it a surprise and not a hit was because from the cover and just the fact that it was sort of a historical whodunit, I went into this book assuming it was going to be somewhat kind of cozy or have a lighter tone to it, but this is a very dark mystery. It is set in Harlem in the 20s, and our main character has a really horrific backstory having to do with a serial killer, and then she is also essentially coerced by the police, who are like racist assholes, to help them try to catch a serial killer in the present day, who is making their way through Harlem. And I really enjoyed the main character in this was great. I'm terrible at names, you guys know this, but I'm terrible at names, I don't remember her name, but she was really likable. I liked her whole sort of like found family group around her. There is a queer love story element, which I was really rooting for and was glad that that's where it went. I think that I believe this is the beginning of a series, and I think that this is a really good foundation for a series. And it's a different kind of historical mystery than we normally get. I just would want people to know that it is much darker than what I thought it was going to be and what, you know, some of the marketing around it made me think it was going to be. But I think it is really, really good. I think it's a debut. There is I mentioned this in the roundup of arcs that I did last weekend, but I do think that there's a little bit of clunkiness in terms of how time progresses within the novel that just was a little bit off, and you can tell it's a debut in that sense, but I think it was actually a very strong debut and a very compelling world. Like, I would look for more books in this series because I thought it was really well done. So surprised me with the kind of book it was, but it was a pleasant surprise. Next, we have, the reason this surprised me was because it was just better than I thought it was going to be. It was called Entered in the Alien Bride Lottery by Margot Bond Collins. And I just thought that this was really good. This was, as it says on the tin, apparently in this sci-fi world, there's an alien species who has come and protected Earth from other invaders, and in return, all human women between the ages of 21 and 35 have to enter into this bride lottery every year. And then that's what I thought it was. But when I got into it, the reason it surprised me was because when you get into it, it's actually basically kind of like The Bachelor, or kind of like a reality competition show. And I just thought that that was really fun. I thought it was just a really well executed, very campy kind of story. Not the deepest characterization. It's not quite on Ruby Dixon level. We will talk about someone who's almost there in a minute. But it's not quite to there, but I did really just enjoy, this gave me what I was wanting it to give me and a little bit more. Like, this was a little bit better than I was expecting. So there's like an entire series, and I'm 100% going to continue in this series because I was surprised at how fun it was. And then the last surprise I wanted to mention was Conflict is Not Abuse by Sarah Schulman. This was a really thought-provoking book. I had heard it recommended or referenced, I guess, in a few YouTube video essayists' videos in reference to ways to think about like accountability culture or cancel culture, whatever you want to call that. And I think in that context, it actually has a lot of really interesting and powerful things to say. How online communities mediate, you know, people breaking taboos or breaking boundaries. Some of the things she talks about are resisting overstating harm, overreacting to difference that leads to justifying cruelty or over incarceration in terms of like real world consequences as punishment, or widespread practice of shunning. She argues that by conflating conflict with abusiveness, you minimize actual abuse and actual violence. And then false accusation, sorry, like these were the notes I just taken because I'm like, oh yeah, that's like, I really like the language around this. False accusation of harm is used to support complicity and escalations of harm. Individual inability to problem solve leads to over like policing of situations. So because, and again, more in the real world, if you can't deal with conflict interpersonally or difference interpersonally, there's a higher propensity to involve official state actors, which I thought was a good, observation. And then this quote I thought was a really good one. When they, whoever they are, need to be abused, the truth no longer matters. And I think that is something very resonant to online communities at times. And then the last thing that stuck out to me was this idea of the crime not being punished, but stating the truth about the crime being what is punished. There's also an extent, so those are some of the kind of ideas she's playing with, and I like those ideas as a framework. I think how she applies them, because she does all these different case studies, I thought had varying degrees of interest or persuasiveness. This book she states several times that she was writing in 2014. I wonder if some of the ways she talks about online discourse would be different if she was writing today, because I think she sometimes minimizes frankly, the reality of online spaces for many people's lives at this point. I feel like there was a little bit of sort of like being a little bit of a Luddite with respect to that at times. So that I wasn't convinced of. And some of her applications, I felt like she was oversimplifying or over expecting people to be able to put aside what are essentially their basic human rights to be able to reach out to repair damage. So it was an interesting and surprising read insofar as it was the kind of nonfiction where there was definitely things I was very interested in and very compelled by. Like, I would love to have this as a book club pick for fellow content creators. With respect to how we kind of police our online spaces, I think that there could be some really interesting conversation from that. And also, I will say she also applies this framework to Israel and Palestine in 2014, like the escalating conflict at that time. And I really actually thought her framing was that was the most compelling use case she had, essentially how escalation happens because of conflict. I thought that basically just being reminded of the conflict at that time and just the depressing reality of this cycle, but also I think actually addressing what's going on right now in Palestine, people will often sort of hand wavy it and say, well, it's complicated. It is in fact complicated, but that doesn't mitigate actual human rights abuse issues that are happening. It just makes it complicated in the sense of, if you really want to get into the nitty gritty of how we're in this situation, it's colonialism and large scale anti-Semitism in Europe. Do you know what I mean? So it is complicated in terms of the history of how we've gotten into this situation. But I thought she did a really good job of using her framework for that particular conflict in a way that helped me process some of those complicated feelings, because I think it's hard for people who don't live in the US to understand how much pressure there is about uncritical support of Israel. It really wasn't until I moved, and then also I'm a former evangelical like Fundy, and there's this specific theology around Zionist state in Palestine that's actually very anti-Semitic when you unpack it, but whatever. So there's these two really strong forces of how most Americans, at least my age, were enculturated to think about this topic. It wasn't until I moved to Canada and met Canadian evangelicals who had a much more nuanced and critical approach to thinking through these issues that I even really had any of this challenge. So all that to say, it is complicated, but not in the way that people often say that it's complicated, as a way to get out of actually having to reckon with what's going on. And I thought that this was really helpful for me, and even just addressing some of the, frankly, I think kind of brainwashing or, dogma about the way to think about some of these issues that I may have consciously wanted to problematize in my head, but really it sinking in and helping me think through that, I found it to be actually quite helpful. So anyway, all that to say, I think it was just a surprise because it's been a while since I've had a nonfiction read that made me think about it so much, not because I just completely agreed with it, but because I had a more complicated response to it. I didn't just say oh yeah, I just think all of this is right. It was more that it just made me engage with it. Yeah, anyway, all that to say, I recommend it as a thought-provoking read, not necessarily a read that's like, oh, I really agree with everything in here, but just something that definitely inspired thought in me. And then I had 3 hits I wanted to talk about. So maybe first let's start with Honey Phillips. Very hard pivot out of Conflict is Not Abuse, but we'll start with Honey Phillips. So I have been on a Honey Phillips deep dive this month. I have been trying to read or like start a bunch of her different series because I very much was enjoying her most recent series at the beginning of the month, the end of last month, the beginning of this month. Ruby Dixon recommended Honey Phillips to me through her Insta stories. And so that is how she got on my radar. So I was like, okay, I see a lot of promise here. Like, let me try a bunch of her different series. I will tell you that I think once she got into the late part of 2019 forward, her writing and characterizations and plot all get a lot better. But I think even her earliest stuff, I'm like, yeah, this is actually like really, the world setups are interesting. I think the characterization hasn't been there always. But as I mentioned, I think the more recent stuff has more of that. And the 2 big hits I had, one were Krampus and the Crone, which is a sci-fi version of a Christmas novella that I thought was fantastic. It was exactly like, it was that particular book. I was like, this is the closest thing to a Ruby Dixon book I've ever read that was not written by Ruby Dixon, because it had like the fun kind of campy element, the interesting world setup, and like just enough characterization. The other thing I've realized through Honey Phillips, because sometimes her heroes are very alpha, I realized that the reason that Ruby Dixon's books work so well for me is that all of her heroes are basically these big dumb cinnamon rolls. Like, they're all just sweetie pies at their core. For the most part, the Draconi, I guess, maybe a little less so, but definitely on like Ice Planet Barbarians and mostly in the Rizdiverse, they're all they want to do is make their heroines happy. And so like the fact that they are big, strong, very like potentially aggressive beings is completely mitigated by the fact that they're kind of just sweetie pies at their heart. Honey Phillips doesn't always have that, and I don't enjoy those books as much just on a taste level, but Krampus and the Crone was a great example where we have an actual Krampus who's really an alien, who's just this big softy inside, and he's like getting together with the local witch in this little village, and it's just the cutest. I really enjoyed that one. I think my friend Izzy read it too. I saw her on Goodreads that she was somebody else who'd read that. So I thought that was super fun. And then also I've really enjoyed this cyborg series she has going where we are terraforming Mars. And it's like these relationships between these cyborg men and human women who've come as settlers. They're basically like spaghetti westerns in space with a lot of sex. And they're fun, so I really enjoyed it. I think it was called The Good, the Bad, and the Cyborg. That one was really fun. Yeah, I'm into that series. I'm excited to keep going. So Honey Phillips was not a uniform hit this month, but overall, definitely, I've been enjoying diving into her back catalog. That has like been my good palate cleansing thing to go to. Then I also really enjoyed My Sister the Serial Killer by Oyenkin Braithwaite. This was kind of a surprise to, well, I guess it wasn't. I went back and forth between putting this as a hit and a surprise because people had warned me that this wasn't a straight up serial killer book in the way that you might expect. It's more of like it's like a character study, and I found this to be a really compelling character study with a kind of thriller plot engine to it. So if you go in expecting a traditional thriller or traditional whodunit, I think you will be disappointed. But if you go into this expecting like a very thought-provoking and interesting version of a literary character study between this woman and her sister, I think that you will enjoy this. And so actually this gave me a lot to think about in terms of like cycles of abuse and cycles of harm, gender and race. I feel like I'm very late to the train on this one because it's a couple of years old now, but this one really worked for me. I think it probably needed to be a little longer or a little shorter for me to have just like fully loved it. It didn't have quite enough meat on the bones for how long it was, but I think I wouldn't have held that against it if it had been a little bit shorter, if that makes sense. But overall, I think if you're looking for something just a little bit different, and I don't know, I really enjoyed this. It's very short, and this was a book club pick, and I'm actually very excited to get into a full discussion of that in our book club because I think that there's a lot here to talk about. So excited for that. And then the last hit I was going to mention is Anne of Manhattan. This is a contemporary romance retelling of Anne of Green Gables. The publisher sent this to me, and I'm going to tell you, I really enjoyed this. I think people who maybe are very Well, either if you don't want to see Anne and Gilbert getting it on, or you're very nostalgically tied to the source material, I think maybe this isn't going to work as well for you. But I think I have just enough nostalgia that like this felt cozy and comfy, but not so much that I was going to be mad. I mean, like, I love fan fiction, and this basically is just like really well written fan fiction. So just to give you a sense of the kind of thing that you may get from this book, I bookmarked this. Just to give you a sense, like if you can deal with seeing Gilbert and Anne through this light. So the hot cold, the push the pull, he couldn't do it anymore because his feelings this time around were more complicated than the need of a 13-year-old to get his crush to notice him or the youthful lust of a 17-year-old. Back then he would have settled for anything she'd give him, a smile, a kiss, a date. Now he wanted as a man wanted, with the urge to take her apart with his hands and put her back together with the words he'd whisper into her hair afterwards. He wanted her to come home with him at the end of the night and to have her full and complete concentration. So just to give you a sense of like, they go to Pound Town. If you're not gonna like that, you won't like this book. So I, however, was down for them to go to Pound Town, so I thought this was great. I really enjoyed this. I think this is just light, fun, contemporary, good times, like childhood enemies to lovers with a workplace sexual harassment subplot. It worked for me. If you liked that passage, it might work for you too. So I think that will do it for me for this month. Like I said, kind of a weird one in terms of where I am in my reading mood. I think I'm slowly tiptoeing my way out of my slump, so fingers crossed that will continue. Let me know how your reading month went in the comments, or if you've read any of the books I talked about, let me know that below. And yeah, I think that will do it for me. So if you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, follow me on the social medias if you are so inclined. I have all that information listed in the description box below, and I think that will do it. I hope you're having an absolutely lovely day today, and I will just talk to you soon. Bye.